Ember Knights is an action roguelike developed by Doom Turtle and released on July 18th of 2023. This beautiful pixel art arena-based action roguelike is a fantastic addition to the genre. Although the game isn't perfect, the charm of its character design, interesting weapons and builds, as well as the engaging combat outshines all the rest. Since its release, it has received quite a few major content updates, all of which have been free, and the developers are continuing to improve the game through community feedback and have several more updates in store before they release their first DLC in the summer of this year. I'm really excited to delve into this game with you. So without any further ado, let's dive right into it. In Ember Knights, you are attempting to restore order to the universe as you battle the corruption that is being spread by the mad sorcerer Praxis. You'll defeat enemies and collect Ember to restore life to the Ember tree. Restoring the Ember unlocks various passives that will assist you in your journey, some of which are simple stat increases, while others can grant you revives or the ability to reroll rewards. As you traverse the 5 different realms, you'll encounter NPCs that will grant you access to new abilities, items, weapons, and the ability to purchase items before you enter a run. Each of the NPCs will have designated areas in the hub world where you'll be able to interact with them and explore their various functionalities. Each of the characters has a lot of charm, and their dialogue does a pretty good job at conveying their personalities. Unfortunately, the game isn't currently voice acted, and I don't think that there are any plans to do so in the future, but if you're listening, Doom Turtle, I think it would add a lot of character if you decided to do it. Each of your runs will feature 5 unique zones, with each room having randomized doors to give the player choices for progress, much like Hades. These rooms will have different rewards associated with them, from rooms that will grant you items, others will offer currency, spells, or stat gems. Some of the rooms have additional challenges which are typically displayed on the door in the form of a skull, as practice comes to try and thwart your plans, and it will be up to you to decide if the risk is worth the reward. Each of the different zones have their own distinct themes, with different enemy, mini-boss, and boss designs, some of which are definitely better than others, and we'll talk more about that in a bit when we discuss the balancing. But overall, I do like that each of the areas come with their own challenges, and the environment design is incredible. The combat is where Ember Knight shines the most. You'll be able to unlock up to 7 different weapons, each of which have their own unique skill tree that you can invest a currency called Ash into in order to customize it to fit your playstyle. Each of the weapons feel unique and fun to use. My personal favorite is probably the Nexal Staff, which is a ranged weapon that thrives off of skill damage and comes with a skill by default, which is unique to this weapon in particular. Speaking of skills, you'll be able to select 2 skills during a run. The skills refresh off of auto attacks, and some items have the ability to refresh skills as well. This makes the combat loop pretty satisfying as you have to weave in auto attacks between spells, and while in some games this can be tedious, I think it is very well done here as the refresh times for most spells is fairly short, and the attack speed of the weapons is generally pretty fast. Overall, I would say that the diversity of items is decent, and there are some pretty good synergies that you can put together later in the game, some of which are far more powerful than others. It is relatively satisfying to put together a good build depending on the difficulty level of the game, which we will touch on in just a moment. The game focuses on elemental damage to implement these synergies, which isn't anything new, but it does do it relatively well. You'll be able to obtain cold, fire, lightning, and poison damage and modify how these different effects behave with certain items, which does give the player a sense of crafting their own build, since for the most part there aren't any items that are simple stat buffs. There are a couple of nuances to the combat that is fairly well done. The first of which is that each weapon has a charge attack that will have alternative effects and in some instances can be changed in the skill tree. Like the charge attack, the skills are also charged up by holding down the skill. If you time it correctly, you'll perform a perfect, and it will have greater effects, and some items in the game are also tied to this mechanic as well. For instance, the Warding Scepter will grant you 5 armor every time you successfully complete a perfect skill. In this way, the combat has a lot more depth than it may seem on the surface. Just like with the perfect mechanic for skills and weapons, there's also a perfect dodge. If you manage to dodge roll at just the right time, you will perform a dodge. This is also tied to some items in the game, such as a pair of boots that guarantee that your next weapon attack will be critical after you dodge an enemy attack. I've personally really enjoyed these systems, and mastering the timing while weaving in and out of combat can be very challenging, especially at higher difficulty levels. There are certain enemy types that can make this very difficult, as they have attacks that are more or less unstoppable, such as these tree dudes and their bullshit puddles and these knights that dash at you from across the screen. One thing that I do wish that the developers would add is some way to interrupt these attacks so that at higher difficulty levels, you don't feel like you just have to constantly dodge in order to stay alive. I think being able to soft lock the enemies with attacks would be fine considering the mob density that is present in the game. This would lean into target priority and make it feel a little more fair. Once you've beat your first run, you'll unlock the ability to loop and continuously run through the different stages to see how far you can take your build. This will also unlock the difficulty modifier that is a lot like the heat system in Hades. The biggest issue that the game is currently facing is the balancing in this particular area. As it stands, the developers have added achievements in the game for beating the game at max difficulty level with each of the weapons, and there is currently only one build that is capable of completing it, which obviously isn't ideal since the items that you get are randomized, making it nearly impossible to beat. The developers have stated that they are going to do some patching in this regard in the next major update, so hopefully that will resolve it, but we'll have to wait and see. On top of that, there are some major balancing issues with the boss variants, which can be turned on as a part of the heat system. Several of these boss variants are so overtuned that it basically feels unfair. Like all the rest, this modifier is optional, however it is a clear problem that needs to be addressed. These variants should be challenging, but in the case of King Bruma for instance, he spawns so many adds and has such long invulnerability states that it is basically a run killer unless you have the aforementioned build setup. These difficulty settings are something that I believe need to be looked at again and tweaked for the sake of the longevity of the game. As I mentioned earlier, the visual elements of Ember Knights are very well done. The pixel art pushes the boundaries of the medium. This is particularly noticeable in the visual effects and boss design. I think they've done an amazing job at crafting a very clear and consistent style across the entire game that they've continued to improve on over the game's lifetime. They've added weapon skins that you can obtain through completing the different challenges associated with that weapon, as well as quite a few colors for the outfits and colors for your knight, giving you the ability to customize the way you look, which I wish more games in the genre would do. There's definitely a lot to love as far as the aesthetics of the game is concerned, and I can't wait to see what else they come up with in the future. A bit of personal feedback. While it is great that we have different colors for our outfits and knights, it would be nice to get totally new costumes for each of the weapons, since our outfit changes when you select a different weapon. I think this additional layer of customization and making them rewards for late game achievements would give even more reason to continue playing the game. Currently, there is a free battle pass system that has been implemented in Gunfire Reborn that I think is definitely a step in the right direction for the genre, and I think something similar could work very well for this game. The sound design is pretty decent overall. Like I said before, there isn't any voice acting, which is a shame since it could add a lot of character, but it isn't a big deal considering it's an indie game with a limited budget. The general sound effects for defeating bosses and opening rewards is fairly satisfying, which I definitely think is important in a game like this. The music isn't super memorable, but it's not bad by any means. As for my final thoughts, I definitely think Ember Knights is a lot of fun, and the gameplay loop is really solid, with some real potential as far as items and builds go, and it is definitely worth picking up, as long as you're aware that it is very much still a work in progress, despite its full release status. There are some areas such as balancing that need fleshing out, and some of the skills and items could use a tune-up in order to make them more viable at the later stages of the game. The developers have been consistent with updates, and have been active among the community taking in feedback and making changes accordingly, so I do think that they'll definitely fix these issues in time, and I can't wait to see what the future updates bring to the game. If you've enjoyed this video and are looking for some other action roguelikes to sink your teeth into, definitely check out my review of Astral Ascent here on the screen. As always, I hope you have a fantastic day. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.